Next up, we've got Mike Bartow with the Department of Labor and Industry. Mike has been with the workers' compensation section of the Department of Labor for over 6 years. He is the claims examiner and assists injured workers, employers, and other stakeholders navigate the workers' compensation system in Montana. So please welcome Mike.
Thumbs up, nothing's down.
That's right.
Okay, thanks for sticking around for this. I know I'm between you and lunch today, so I'll try to make this as applicable for almost everybody here. I'm sure most of you deal with workers' comp as it is, as employers anyhow. So what I'll do is this is real high level. What I'll do is I'll start going down rabbit holes, and anybody who has any questions, certainly stop me and ask me questions as we're going along here. So starters, I don't work for any insurers. A lot of times the state gets confused for Montana State Fund, which is an insurer in the state. But I also don't work for any other insurers. I'm not an attorney or a legal representative. Even though my wife and kids say I know it all, I am not. And every claim is specific. So there are lots of things I don't know about workers' comp, and every day I get reminded what that is. So they are very claim specific. So you always hear those stories about somebody that got the great settlement and they walked away, and how great it was and how they're rich and they're going on for life. But again, very, very claim specific. So what we're going to do is kind of look at a high level view of what happens with the claim. So what will happen is workplace injury happens, and that's where most employers will come in. They'll file what's called the first report of injury, or the employee will, and then they can submit it to the insurer or to us at the Employment Relations Division. What happens when they come into the Employment Relations Division, we enter it into the state, and then we forward it on to the insurer. So then what happens is when the insurer gets it, they'll start to investigate that claim. And that's where they're going to call the injured worker, they're going to call you as an employer and get versions of what happened. If a claim is accepted by the insurer, they'll just kind of go along, they'll start paying benefits. If a claim is denied, then what can happen is they may be still gathering information. So if they don't have medical records to determine whether or not that's a compensable claim or not, or they may just deny it and say this did not happen in the course and scope of the employment. That employee has the opportunity to seek mediation. In Montana, almost every denial or any disputes go to mediation first. And that comes into the Employment Relations Division, where we have a group of professional mediators and their telephone conferences. They'll get the injured worker and their representative on the phone, and then they'll get the claims examiner on the phone, and then they'll try to work out an agreeable compromise. Sometimes they'll still stay denied. Sometimes that claim will be accepted, and again, the benefits will be paid. If during the course of mediation, the mediator will make a recommendation in some cases, and it's non-binding mediation, which means neither party has to accept that. And if they choose not to accept it, then they can appeal it to the workers' compensation court, and then it goes in front of the judge. And I can say that in the last year and a half or 2 years, it's gone. I've seen one that actually got appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overturned part of the workers' compensation court judge's determination. So, like I said, things can happen that you don't expect to happen. So again, every claim is very, very specific. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at two situations. We're going to look at a sole proprietor business that is currently up for policy renewal. And we're going to look at kind of what happens when the policy is renewed and if the policy isn't renewed. And then again, if there is a situation in which an employee gets hurt. So the case we're going to look at is Joe's tree trimming services. And we'll look again at what happens when the workers' compensation policy gets renewed and when it doesn't get renewed. And then again, we'll kind of talk about some things that go along and variables that go along with that. So things that we want to consider is what's the purpose of the workers' compensation policy, who's covered under it, what happens if a policy is not renewed or they just don't get one, and what happens with that workplace injury. Reasons for workers' compensation: it reduces the employer's risk. If you don't have workers' compensation and an employee gets hurt, they can take it to civil court. In Montana, the workers' compensation policy is exclusive remedy, which means they can't personally go after you. It stays within the workers' compensation system. It's also a no-fault system where, you know, nobody is considered at fault there. So there's a great adage that a lot of the attorneys will say, stupidity is compensable. So again, and that goes both ways. In some cases, workers' compensation is not mandatory. So we'll look at some of the exceptions as we get going along here, and hopefully we'll look at, and I'll show you where you can find some of the statutes. So for example, if you're just having casual employment, or you have a kid that comes and mows your lawn once a week, that's not required. Again, we'll look at kind of what you need to look at. So looking at this, we'll look at our example here. Joe's trade attorney is a sole proprietor. He's been in business for 5 years. He has work comp coverage currently, but his policy is set to expire, and he's not sure whether or not he should renew since he's never had a workplace injury. Joe discusses with his insurance agent and decides to renew his policy with no lapse in coverage. And so you can see where sometimes those policies will expire. Folks forget about that kind of stuff, and then there's a gap in between. So Joe's the president. He works full-time. He has his son working for him part-time. He has a secretary, and then he has 3 full-time employees that are working for him. During the course of employment, Justin was cutting down a tree, and when it shifted unexpectedly, it crushed him. Now, these are extreme examples. The injured employee was taken by ambulance for medical care and then airlifted to a different hospital due to the serious nature of his injury. The employee suffered multiple fractures, internal injuries, but most seriously, he became paralyzed below the chest as a result of a complete spinal cord injury. He was unable to return to work as a tree trimmer. So what happens now? Push the laser, sorry. The employee is required to notify you within 30 days. So, and not their coworker, they have to report it to the supervisor. So obviously in these situations where somebody has to go to the hospital, in most cases, the employer knows it. So even if they cut their finger, got to go get stitches, that's pretty good for a notification. But there's a lot of times where somebody strains their shoulder and they think, I'll just walk it off, and they don't bother to tell anybody. The things that you want to take place of is what time it happened and where it happened. And again, they have to have actual knowledge of it. So if 2 months down the road, somebody comes and says, when we were moving this pipe, I strained my shoulder, it still hasn't gotten better, and they're now telling you, they're not going to have a compensable injury, but they can still file that. You have the right to file that claim. And I would let them do it. Don't let that be a delay between you and them. Let them file the claim and let the insurance company be the bad guy, and then it doesn't cause a contentious relationship between you and them. So there's what's called the first report of injury. Once they notify the employer, then they have up to a year to file the actual claim. And what they do is they fill out that first report of injury, or you can. That form can be found on our website. Now, hopefully when we get to the end here, I'll show you where that's at. You can have the employee fill it out. You can fill it out. Usually we want the employee's signature at the bottom of it, and the insurance company will actually require that. They'll want their signature on it. So the first thing the insurance will start looking at is, did this happen again in the course and scope of their employment? If they're out back screwing around, you know, doing something that's not part of their job or part of their job assignment, they're probably going to deny that claim. The insurer will reach out, and again, they're going to ask for information from you, from the employee, and then they'll also have that employee sign off on medical records releases. And then they'll ask those doctors, did this injury actually occur and what they're saying happened? And they'll want objective medical documentation saying that did happen in the course of the scope. They have 30 days. Once the insurer gets the claim, they have 30 days to accept or deny it. Sometimes they'll do what's called a soft denial, saying we're waiting on medical information, but once we have it, we may reconsider that. Or they'll do what's called a reservation of rights, where they don't accept liability, but they pay benefits. And so a 615 is one where they'll just pay medical benefits. The 608 is where they'll actually pay medical benefits and indemnity benefits or wage loss benefits. An accepted claim, again, will get medical and wage loss benefits. Sometimes death benefits are needed, and sometimes full rehab benefits are needed. And as we discussed earlier, if it's denied, that employee has the option to request mediation. Again, what they'll do is medical benefits, they'll continue to treat that claimant under the utilization and treatment guidelines, and then they'll also, the injured worker has the right to choose the initial treating physician, the treating physician. But again, if they're seeing their general practitioner and they've got a knee injury that doesn't seem to be getting better, that insurer might ask for them to be sent to an orthopedic specialist, and then they'll take over and redirect. Wage loss benefits are actually at 66 2/3 of whatever their average weekly wage is. They're not going to get their full weekly wage. They have to miss 4 days or 32 hours first of work, of scheduled work. So if they get hurt on a Friday and Saturday are normally their days off, they miss Monday, and then they're back to work Tuesday, they don't qualify for it. And then after they've missed 21 days, then those initial 4 days will kick back in and ensure awards and payouts. If there's death benefits, again, they'll go to a beneficiary, spouses or children. For parents of people who have no other beneficiaries, the parents will get up to $2,000. There is also a burial expense that's $10,000. Both rehab available for those workers that aren't going to be able to return to their original job. And then, so what happens is currently when an injury takes place, those medical benefits will close at the end of 5 years from that date of injury. And so at that point in time, when the 5-year mark hits, that injured worker has the opportunity to be able to keep those open to the insurer. And that's only to remain at work or go back to work. So if it's somebody that's got since retired, they won't reopen those benefits. And what they do is then they get submitted to our medical director, and then we have the choice to either have it just addressed by the medical director or reviewed by the medical director or a panel. If a claim is denied, the insurer has the responsibility to notify the department and the injured worker. And again, then they can appeal the denial. Usually the mediation works pretty well. They resolve about 80% of those cases. So when you look at a claim without workers' compensation, again, the workplace injury happens. Before it comes in, we start looking for workers' compensation coverage first and foremost. If we can't find it, then what happens is, well, if workers' compensation coverage is found, it gets sent to the insurer. If it's not found, then what happens is it goes to the UEF, and we start looking for other coverage that might possibly be out there. So that's when you're kind of looking at general contractors, you have subcontractors, you have employees that don't have coverage. The claim can be denied or accepted. Again, our uninsured employees and uninsured employers examiners will investigate that claim just like a normal insurance company will. They'll start looking and say, how did the accident happen? Was it, of course, the scope of employment? All those types of questions are asked. Again, it can be denied, and we do see that, or the claim can be accepted. If it's accepted, again, the benefits are paid out of the uninsured employer's fund. If it's denied, again, they can seek mediation and then kind of go from there. Or it can be appealed to the workers' compensation court after mediation. Usually what will happen is if somebody is working for an uninsured employer, then usually penalties will start being assessed to that employer that's not insured. Again, as we discussed, it gets sent to the insured employers fund. Those penalties are subject to $200 fine or 200% of what premium would have been during the uninsured period. So again, you're talking about those gaps in insurance. Even if somebody did have insurance and they forget to renew it, if there's a gap there, those penalties can kick in for that 6 months or whatever the case may be. And usually what happens is those monies go in to pay the insured employers fund, so those workers that aren't covered by somebody can be covered. Again, when you're looking at that same accident where Joe chose not to renew his policy, skip through these. Again, we're going to look to see if there's any other insurance that can be covered with that. If there was a general contractor or somebody along the line that could have possibly covered it. Again, they'll ask if it was in the course and scope of employment. Did it happen on the employer's job site? Then what they'll do is they'll accept or deny it just like a normal insurance company, or they may put it under reservation rights. When you're looking at employees, you're supposed to have those postings up that tells where your workers' compensation insurance is. It's supposed to be in the general area. Most people put them like in the break rooms, those types of places, so that those employees can find them and go to those places if they need to.
He said he's going to help me go.
The difference is that with the uninsured employers fund, medical is capped at $100,000. Apologize, I jumped ahead here. And again, if it's denied, they can go through mediation and all that mediation process like before. Some of the things that we look at is in the state of Montana, there are 3 ways to be insured. There's plan 1s, plan 2s, and plan 3s. Plan 1 is the self-insured people. So those are going to be your bigger groups like Albertsons are self-insured, Stillwater Mining is insured. And then plan 2s are your private insurers like Hartford, Liberty. You know, most folks will go through their existing insurance agent to get that coverage. And then third is the Montana State Fund, which is a quasi-government agency. What they are is they the insurer of last resort. So if somebody can't go get insurance through, say, Liberty Insurance or other places, Montana State Fund has to take them. Some of the legislative bills that came up recently were the death benefits went, or the burial expense went from $4,000 to $10,000. Workers, you probably heard about this too, where interns now have to be covered by workers' compensation insurance. Marijuana laws obviously are coming into play now too. And then false statements. So when you're looking at an employee and they come in and you say, this job requires you to lift 50 pounds on a regular basis, and they say, yes, I can do that. But they have the doctor say, no, you shouldn't be lifting more than 35 pounds on a regular basis, and they falsify those records, then they can be terminated for that. And laws regarding medical providers being able to dispense drugs. I think that's about all I got. I apologize. Somebody else put the slideshow together and I get to present it. My contact information is up there. Take questions that way too. I can help on your employees' end. I can help on your end. I mean, feel free to call us and we can help anytime you need to have any kind of workplace injury addressed. And then one thing that I'll show you is, can we go to the internet?
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to erd.dli.mt.gov,
I wasn't ready to type yet. You want me to go where?
erd.dli.gov, and it should pop like that. So when you're looking at the tabs down on the bottom, there's workers' compensation. And if you click on that,
You do have a laser pointer too, if you want to.
yep, okay, good, thank you.
It's the middle one.
You can actually go search for workers' compensation. So if you're going to have somebody come do work, you can look for workers' compensation there. If you want to click on that real quick. You just say I accept. And it'll immediately take you to Montana. And let's just say the employer is Core Construction.
What was it?
Core Construction, C-O-R-E.
Oh, I'll go ahead and use the right computer.
Keyboard. And again, this is going to look for, oh, yeah, of course. It will tell you if somebody has, and you can select the dates that you're looking for, coverage dates, where you can see that these people have a policy, and it'll list their policy number right there too. So if you're ever looking for hiring somebody, let's go back a couple, if we can go back to that page again. And then go ahead and go back up to, yeah, there's forms right there. File a work comp claim down there, just where you were headed, sorry.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. I think there is, those are unemployment. You go back too far?
Filing a wage claim, it says.
Let's go back one.
Oh, here we go, wage claim. Oh, that's
We
wage
don't know
claim.
which claims, we're looking for work comp claims.
Yeah, but I thought that's what it said.
It's,
Oh, it said wage claim.
Let's go back up and we must have got, let's go back.
Yep,
to-
we're out of work comp. That's
There
what
you
happened.
go. So there are forms right there too. You can find that first report of injury there.
Hmm.
And then if you'll go back one more again.
Oh, and I put the first injury form on Moodle as well. That seemed to be something that very helpful.
Go back.
Yeah, go back.
Go
up
back
to the
to
tab.
workers'
Yeah.
compensation.
Okay, and then right here, workers' compensation regulations.
If you could point on my monitor, it would really be helpful.
You've got right here the Montana Code annotated, and if you'll just click there. Let's say, for example, in 71 is all the workers' compensation. Let's click in there. And just go to 4 for coverage and liability. It will give you all those statutes, but then go to 401 for me. That's usually an important one. It will tell you who needs to be covered and what exceptions are. And again, kind of when we were talking about the kid mowing your lawn, that's casual employment. It'll talk about, kind of like they were talking about the newspaper carriers too, if they don't have to be covered. It'll tell you if a person needs to be covered or not. If they're considered.
What about the sole proprietor?
Sole proprietors, if they're just doing the work themselves, no.
Okay, any of their family members?
If there are immediate family members. But if they're not immediate family members, then yes. Other things to consider, and usually we'll get calls on a lot of times. If you're a corporation and you're the president of the company and you will get workers' compensation and you will get hurt, a lot of times that policy says that corporate officers have to opt into that policy. And so they'll go and they'll file a claim and they get denied because they chose not to opt into that policy. So food for thought there too, to kind of keep that in mind too. Yes, ma'am.
What if someone's working from home and they get hurt?
That gets pretty great, and we've got a lot of that, as you can imagine right now. So kind of piggybacking on what Mike was talking about earlier, when these companies from out of state are letting somebody work remotely in Montana, what's happening is they're reporting wages in Montana, and they specifically have to have a Montana workers' compensation policy for that employee. And so we're picking up on a lot of those people that need to get a Montana endorsed policy. But again, that gets really, really gray. We've had one company already an employee file for workers' compensation because they strained their back cleaning litter box at home. So, as you can imagine, that's kind of a big deal. And the other thing that we're looking at too, and to keep in mind is, when you send somebody home, a lot of times what they're doing is they're putting their workplace equipment together themselves. So when you're talking about ergonomics and all those kinds of things, do you have the right to come in there and tell them how their workplace station should be set up or not? And so that's a lot of things that the industry is looking at right now, is how do you address those types of situations. And if they trip and fall, they trip over Fluffy the dog, But they were they on break, were they working, was they forced to still to their job? So it's getting pretty interesting how all that's gonna pan out.
At job service, we usually have we have an outside employer outside the state of Montana. We'll tell them what the Montana law is, and they'll say, we don't have to follow that because we're from Nebraska. We go, no. If you have workers here, Montana law supersedes Nebraska law.
Right.
And they don't understand.
Right. Yeah, well, they usually get a call from our other folks, you know.
Yeah.
And it gets a little nasty. But the key thing from my presentation, I hope you'll take away is that if you've got employees, just get insurance for them. It's like homeowners, it's like car insurance. I don't want to pay for those things either. And you hope that you pay for them and you never use them. But the first time you're going to use it, it pays for itself. Yes, ma'am.
So if you have an employee that they have some injury and has to go to the hospital, get stitches, and you know that's all it's gonna be, rather than hurting your rates, sending you in, can you just, as an employer, just pay that up? Is there any rules or is there any?
So those are some, yeah.
Love that question. I'm going to remember that and ask it every single day.
So that gets, here's the other thing. I would say send them in. I would say send them in because if that finger gets infected down the road, he has problems with it.
You'd be liable.
It gets.
But is there a law?
No, and there's some bigger companies now that are looking at having an on-site nurse where the employee goes in and does that. They're okay doing that, but they can't just tell the employee, even though we know that's probably going to happen anyhow. They can't tell the employee that they have to go to that nurse. That employee has the choice to go to wherever they want to. They get to go see the first treating physician.
So they go, and the employee does submit the first report and pays for that to go on the phone. They would not be subjected.
Probably, that's the.
I mean, I know, again, I'm
We
sure
all
there's some
know.
liability.
We know it all happens. We all know what happens.
Asking for a friend, right?
Again, the bigger thing is that every day in my job that I sit there, I get calls from both employers and employees, but usually the situation is the employee calls in and they're great with that happening until that finger gets infected and other things start happening. Then the other problem that happens is then you try to file a first report of injury with your insurer, and your insurer goes, no, you were supposed to tell me within 6 days of that happening. And they go, no, and then they go get their attorneys in the state. And they only did 20% of whatever they did for these employees. But they do a very good job, and they are pit bulls, and they're very good at what they do. Now, don't get me wrong, there are good attorneys on the other side that work for the insurers and defend that type of stuff too. And I know that I sit in the middle of it. And with every story, I know there's two sides. Every time, there are two sides. But I would just encourage you to do it. It's not worth the bellyache of where it goes from there. You know, you might get away with it, but at some point in time, it's like Carmen. It's kind of like the guy that fraudulently gets the work comp claim. At some point in time, it's going to catch up with you, and the investigators find it. You know, so it's, and again, you pay for that insurance again, like a homeowner's insurance or a car insurance. You hope you never use it. First time you use it, it's worth it. And let those insurers do it. Don't decide whether or not that claim is making up a story or not. Those people do a very, very, very good job. Those investigators are very thorough, and they're not going to pay somebody if they don't have to. They're going to look at, they're going to scrutinize just about everything. Let them be the bad guy. Don't get in the middle between you and your employee with that. Let them be the bad guy. That's what you're paying for. You know?
It just affects your rates.
It can, if you're filing multiple times, you know, and if you've got a clerical worker and you're classified as clerical and you only have one claim a year, it's not going to impact you that much. But if you're somebody that's sending people in on a regular basis, yes. The other thing is like Montana State funding, we have safety programs, and you can help control that mod rate by going through there and having safety programs in place for your employees. You know, so those are things to ask the insurer about, you know, when you're using them. I don't know, like I said, it's just 90% of those claims go through that none of us know about. It is the situation where the employee cuts their fingers, they get stitches, and they go on. And it's those exceptions where the guy hurts his back, he says, and then you find him out on the golf course. Those are the ones that get all the notoriety. And I've gotten those calls where a guy calls me and he goes, hey, what's going on with my claim? I go, what do you mean what's going on with your claim? He'll go, well, I got a letter that said that my examiner's closing my claim. I go, he goes, what about the rest of the money? I go, what money? He goes, well, shouldn't I get a settlement or something? I would say, did your doctor release you to go back to your regular job? Yes. Were you impaired? Well, I think so. Was it a class 1 impairment? Yeah, I think that's what it was. Yeah, didn't pay me. But my buddy got a settlement. No, go back to work. You think we got a job. And that's, you know, at the end of the day, we sit on that fence and we watch that stuff happen on both sides. But we also get those situations where somebody goes to work, and this is the one that drives me crazy. Somebody goes to work and they work underneath the table. If you're an employee, that should be ding, 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 ding. The lights should be going off in your head. Yes, you're not going to be paying taxes and you're getting cash money. But when you step in the hole and hurt your knee and you go to the doctor, you're not going to find the guy that's employing you anymore. He's going to be nowhere to be found. Or he's going to do, in the case that I'm talking about here, he got offered a Jeep to fix up and sell it so that he can help pay the hospital bill. So, you know, it goes both ways. But again, I just cringe every time I pay my homeowner's insurance. And I hope to God that I never use it, you know, type of deal. And it's the same thing. And let the insurer take care of it. And we're happy to help too. Like I said, just there's 3 or 4 of us in our office that kind of handle that stuff. We take those calls every day. And we know that when your employee calls me and he says, I cut my finger, my boss told me not to file a claim. You know, I sit in there and I go, okay, you can still file that claim. You're entitled to file that claim. And we get the case where the employer waits till after the 30 days and the employer goes, well, you can't file it now. It's after the 30 days. You're a taxpayer, you can still file that claim. But again, what's going to happen is the insurance will go, right, you didn't notify your employer, you didn't notify the right people. You're denied, and you're not the bad guy for denying. So. Other questions, concerns? And like I said, I don't work for any insurers. I just see how it flows on my side in the middle. Okay. Thank you for your time. Can I finish early?
30 minutes early. Yeah.
30 minutes.
Wow. And you got a snack. Well, I don't know about good. Was it beneficial to you guys?
Yes.
Informative? Okay.